The coffee had gone cold in Michael's hands as he sat across from Sarah at their kitchen table. 6 weeks had passed since he'd discovered the affair. 6 weeks of sleepless nights, endless arguments, and tears that seemed to have no end. The betrayal had carved a hollow space in his chest that ached with every breath. "I made a terrible mistake," Sarah said, her voice breaking as she reached across the table. "But I love you, Michael. I've always loved you. Please give me one more chance to prove it." Her eyes were red-rimmed, pleading. This was the woman he'd married 8 years ago. The woman who'd stood beside him through his father's death, through the failure of his first business, through everything. He wanted to believe that person was still there, buried beneath the lies and the betrayal. "How do I trust you again?" he asked, the question barely above a whisper. "Every time you pick up your phone, every time you're late from work, I'll wonder, how do I live like that?" "I'll be completely transparent," Sarah promised, sliding her phone across the table. "I've already blocked him on everything. You can check my phone whenever you want. I'll tell you where I am, who I'm with. I'll do whatever it takes, Michael. I can't lose you. I won't lose us." Michael looked at the phone lying between them like a peace offering. He thought about the home they'd built together, the dreams they'd shared, the future they'd planned. 7 months from now, they were supposed to celebrate their 9th anniversary in Italy, a trip they'd been saving for since their wedding day. Could he really throw all of that away? Didn't love deserve one final chance? "Okay," he heard himself say, the word feeling both like a lifeline and a noose. "But Sarah, this is it. One chance. If you break my trust again, we're done. No discussion, no second chances after this. I need you to understand that." "I understand," she said quickly, standing up and moving around the table. She wrapped her arms around him, and despite everything, despite the pain and the doubt, he found himself holding her back. Thank you for believing in us. I promise I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice." The first few weeks felt like a honeymoon period. Sarah came home early from work, cooked his favorite meals, and left her phone unlocked on the counter while she showered. They went to couples therapy every Thursday evening, where Dr. Morrison guided them through exercises in rebuilding trust and communication. Sarah spoke openly about her fears and insecurities, about how she'd made the worst decision of her life in a moment of weakness. "I felt invisible." She'd confessed in one session, tears streaming down her face. "You were so focused on building your new company, and I know that's not an excuse. But I felt lonely. He paid attention to me, and I let that matter more than my marriage. It was selfish and stupid, and I hate myself for it." Michael had squeezed her hand, seeing for the first time the pain behind her actions. Maybe they could really heal from this. Maybe love was enough. They started dating again, real dates, like when they were young. Movie nights, weekend hikes, dinner at the small Italian restaurant where he'd proposed. Sarah seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding what she'd broken. She talked about their future again, about maybe finally trying for the baby they'd discussed before everything fell apart. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching the sunset through their living room window, Sarah rested her head on his shoulder. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "We both made mistakes," Michael replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "What matters is that we're trying." But as he said the words, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning he tried desperately to ignore. Trust, once shattered, leaves behind fragments sharp enough to draw blood. He pushed the thought away and pulled his wife closer, choosing hope over fear. If only he'd listened to that voice. It started small to mention, without seeming paranoid or controlling. 3 months into their reconciliation, Michael noticed Sarah angling her phone away when she typed. Not every time, just occasionally. In tiny moments that could easily be explained away as coincidence. When he'd walk into the room, she'd smoothly close whatever she was looking at, offering him a smile that seemed just a fraction to practiced. "Who are you texting?" he'd asked once, keeping his voice casual. Double quote, "So, just Rachel about her birthday party next week." Sarah had replied without hesitation, showing him a message thread with her best friend. "She wants to do a wine tasting. Want to come?" He'd felt foolish for asking, for doubting. This was exactly what Dr. Morrison had warned him about, projecting past betrayals onto innocent present moments. He was supposed to be rebuilding trust, not undermining it with suspicion. But then came the phone calls. The first one happened on a Tuesday night. They were watching a movie when Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression flickering with something Michael couldn't quite identify before she excused herself. "Work thing," she said, already heading toward the bedroom. "Johnson needs the quarterly reports revised. I'll just be a few minutes." 20 minutes later, she was still behind the closed door, her voice a low murmur he couldn't make out. When she finally emerged, she looked flustered. "Everything okay?" Michael asked. "Fine. Johnson is just being impossible about the formatting. You know how he gets." She kissed his forehead and returned to the couch, but her attention seemed elsewhere for the rest of the evening. The late-night calls became a pattern. Always work emergencies, always behind closed doors, always leaving Sarah distracted afterward. Michael wanted to believe her she'd been promoted to senior manager 6 months ago, and her job did demand more of her time. But the timing felt wrong. Why would her boss call at 9:30 on a Wednesday night about formatting? Why did she need to take these calls in private? "Maybe you should talk to HR about work-life boundaries," Michael suggested one evening after the third call that week. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I can't just tell my boss not to call me, Michael. This promotion came with responsibilities. I thought you'd be supportive." "I am supportive. I just miss spending uninterrupted time with you." "We spend plenty of time together," she said, her tone cooler now. "I'm working hard for our future." "I thought that's what you wanted." The argument felt like walking through a minefield. Any pushback was met with defensiveness or deflection. Michael found himself apologizing for concerns that, in the light of her explanations, seemed petty and controlling. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe this was what his wounded trust looked like, seeing threats where none existed. But then he noticed the deleted messages. He hadn't meant to snoop. Sarah had left her phone on the counter while she showered, and it had lit up with a text preview from a number with no name attached. By the time Michael glanced over, the notification had disappeared. Curious, he picked up the phone. She'd said he could check it any time. After all, and opened her messages. The thread with the unknown number was empty except for a message from today. Got it. But the timestamp showed there should have been more. The conversation history jumped from 3 weeks ago to today, with obvious gaps. She'd been deleting messages. Michael's heart began to pound. He checked other threads. Her messages with work contacts seemed sparse, unnaturally brief. He opened her call log. Dozens of calls to numbers not saved in her contacts, some lasting 20 or 30 minutes. All of this invisible, hidden beneath the surface of normalcy. When Sarah emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel with her hair wet, Michael was still holding her phone. What are you doing?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You're deleting messages," he said quietly. "Why are you deleting messages?" "I delete spam, Michael, and old conversations to save space." "Jesus, I told you that you could check my phone. But this feels like you're looking for reasons not to trust me. There are gaps in your conversations. Whole sections missing. I told you, I delete things. This is exactly what Dr. Morrison warned about. You're so traumatized by what happened that you're creating problems where there aren't any." Her eyes welled with tears. "I can't keep living under constant suspicion. I've done everything you asked. When is it going to be enough?" Michael felt the ground shift beneath him. Was he being unreasonable? Creating problems where none existed? She seemed genuinely hurt, wounded by his lack of trust. He thought about all the progress they'd made, all the effort she'd put into their reconciliation. "You're right," he said finally, setting down the phone. "I'm sorry. I'm still healing." That night, lying in bed beside his sleeping wife, Michael stared at the ceiling and tried to silence the voice in his head that whispered he was making a terrible mistake. Michael hadn't planned to install the camera. The idea felt invasive, a violation of the trust they were supposedly rebuilding. But after the deleted messages, after catching Sarah in what felt like too many small inconsistencies, he needed peace of mind. Or perhaps he needed proof, though, of what? He wasn't ready to admit. "Home security systems are getting so affordable now," he'd mentioned casually over breakfast. "I was reading about a break-in to streets over. Maybe we should install some cameras?" Sarah had barely looked up from her coffee. If it makes you feel safer, sure. Whatever you think is best. Her indifference should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like confirmation that she had nothing to hide or that she was confident she wouldn't be caught. Michael hated the person he was becoming. The suspicious stranger who analyzed his wife's every word for hidden meanings. He installed 3 cameras, one at the front door, one at the back entrance, and one in the living room facing the main hallway. All of them sent notifications and recordings to his phone. He told Sarah about all 3, demonstrated how they worked, and showed her how to access the feeds. Transparency, right? For 2 weeks, the cameras captured nothing more interesting than Sarah coming home from work, their neighbor's cat crossing the yard, and Michael himself moving through their ordinary life. He began to feel genuinely foolish. Maybe he really was paranoid. Maybe the therapy was working, and his wife had genuinely changed. Perhaps his inability to trust was the only remaining problem in their marriage. Then came the Wednesday evening that changed everything. Michael was in Denver for a regional conference, a trip that had been scheduled for months. He'd almost canceled, not wanting to leave Sarah alone, but she'd insisted he go. "You need this for your business, and I need you to trust me," she'd said, cupping his face in her hands. "I'll be fine. I'll probably just catch up on sleep and binge some terrible reality TV. Go. Build your empire." He'd kissed her goodbye that morning, wanting desperately to believe that everything was okay. The conference sessions were actually engaging, and for a few hours, he'd felt like himself again, focused, ambitious, not consumed by doubt about his marriage. Around 9 p.m., as he sat in his hotel room reviewing notes, he idly opened the home security app. Just checking in, he told himself. Just making sure everything was fine. The living room camera showed Sarah on the couch. But she wasn't alone. Michael's blood turned to ice. Even through the grainy security footage, he recognized the man sitting beside his wife. It was him, David, the co-worker she'd sworn she'd cut all contact with. The man she'd promised was a mistake, an aberration, a closed chapter. They weren't touching, but their body language spoke volumes. They sat angled toward each other, close enough that their knees almost touched. Sarah was laughing at something David said, her hand touching his arm in a gesture of casual intimacy that Michael recognized. Because it used to be directed at him, Michael's hands trembled as he watched. He wanted to call her, to scream, to demand an explanation. But something stopped him, perhaps the memory of the last confrontation, when his accusations had been turned back on him, when he'd been made to feel like the problem. Instead, he just watched. They talked for nearly an hour. Michael couldn't hear what they were saying, but he didn't need to. The way Sarah leaned in, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she'd always had when she was interested in someone, told him everything. This wasn't a chance encounter. This wasn't innocent. At 10:15, Sarah stood up. David stood too. They moved toward the front door, out of frame. Michael quickly switched to the front door camera, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. The angle captured them clearly. Sarah was saying something, smiling. David reached out and brushed something from her shoulder, lint, maybe, or just an excuse to touch her. She didn't pull away. Then he leaned in, and she tilted her face up, and they kissed. Not a friendly peck. A real kiss, the kind that spoke of familiarity and longing. The kind that said this wasn't the first time since her reformation. The kind that said Michael had been played for a fool. After David left, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, a small smile on her face. Then she pulled out her phone, probably deleting their conversation history. Michael thought bitterly and walked back toward the living room. Michael sat in his hotel room, staring at his phone screen long after it had gone dark. He felt strangely calm, almost detached, as if he were watching someone else's tragedy unfold. The panic and pain would come later. He knew. Right now, he existed in a space beyond feeling, where clarity replaced emotion. He'd given her everything, his forgiveness, his trust, another chance at forever. And she'd taken those gifts and used them as cover to continue betraying him. Not in a moment of weakness this time. This was calculated, deliberate. She'd looked him in the eye every day for months, accepted his vulnerability, and lied without hesitation. The question wasn't whether to leave anymore. That was decided the moment David's lips touched hers. The question was how to leave in a way that gave Michael back some of the dignity she'd stolen. He opened his laptop and began making plans. No confrontations this time. No chances for manipulation or tears or promises she had no intention of keeping. This time, he would simply disappear. Michael returned from Denver on Thursday afternoon. His face carefully ranged into a neutral expression. Sarah greeted him at the door with a kiss on the cheek, asking about his conference, mentioning she'd missed him. He watched her perform the role of loving wife and wondered how he'd ever believed this act was real. Conference was great, he said, matching her casual tone. Got some good contacts. I'm exhausted though. Might head to bed early. I made your favorite chicken parmesan, Sarah said brightly. Thought we could catch up over dinner? They ate together like strangers pretending to be intimate. Sarah talked about her week, mentioned a project at work, probably a fiction. Asked about his presentation. Michael responded automatically, his mind elsewhere, calculating timelines and logistics. That night, lying beside her in the darkness, Michael began executing his plan. He'd already contacted 3 real estate agents during his layover, using an encrypted email account Sarah didn't know existed. Their house was in both their names, but his lawyer, yes. He'd hired a lawyer from Denver before his flight had explained his options. He could force a sale or buy out her half. Given the circumstances, Michael wanted nothing from this house except his freedom. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael moved with careful precision. He went to work, came home, maintained his routine, all while systematically dismantling their shared life. He opened a new bank account at a different institution and gradually transferred his portion of their savings. He contacted a moving company that specialized in quick, discreet relocations. He changed the password on his email, his cloud storage, everything digital that Sarah might have access to. Most importantly, he continued watching the cameras. David visited again on the following Tuesday. This time, they were less cautious. Michael watched from his office as his wife led another man to their bedroom. The bedroom with the framed photos of their wedding day still on the nightstand. He didn't watch what happened behind that closed door. He didn't need to. The sight of them walking down the hallway hand in hand told him everything. When Sarah's phone rang later that evening with another work call, Michael just nodded and went back to his book. She disappeared into the bedroom for 45 minutes. He used the time to scan more documents and forward them to his lawyer. "Johnson giving you trouble again?" he asked when she emerged. "You know how he is," she replied with an exasperated smile. "Everything is always urgent." Michael smiled back. "Well, you're good at what you do. He's lucky to have you." The lie sat comfortably on his tongue now. He was becoming fluent in the language of deception, learning from the master. On Saturday, Sarah announced she was going to a work retreat, a team-building week, and at a resort 2 hours away. "It's mandatory," she said, grimacing apologetically. "I tried to get out of it, but Johnson insisted the whole department needs to be there." "When do you leave?" Michael asked. "Friday afternoon. I'll be back Sunday evening. Will you be okay alone for the weekend?" "I'll survive," he said, kissing her forehead. "You go team build. I'll probably just work on my business plan and watch the game." Friday morning, Michael woke before dawn. Sarah was still sleeping, her face peaceful in the early light. He looked at her for a long moment. This person he'd thought he'd spend his life with, and felt nothing but a distant, aching sadness for the man he'd been, who'd believed in fairy tales. By 7 a.m., Sarah had left for her retreat, her weekend bag packed with lingerie. Michael pretended not to notice. By 8 a.m., the moving truck was at the house. Michael had been planning this for weeks, and the crew moved with efficient speed. Furniture, clothes, boxes, everything that was his or that he cared about went into the truck. His leather armchair, his grandfather's desk, the first edition books he'd collected over years, the wedding photos he left. His friend Marcus arrived at 9 to help with the final details. "You sure about this, man?" Marcus asked, carrying a box of kitchen supplies. "I've never been more sure of anything." Michael replied that by 2 p.m., the house was emptied of Michael's presence. The rooms looked oddly sparse, obvious gaps where his life had been. He walked through one final time, saying goodbye to the dreams these walls had contained. He left the cameras running, let her see the empty spaces and wonder, let her come home to the hollowness she'd created. The real estate agent arrived at 3 with the paperwork. Michael had accepted a cash offer below market value, but quick and clean. The buyers wanted to close in 30 days. By then, Michael would be long gone. On the kitchen counter, beneath a vase of dying flowers, Michael left an envelope with Sarah's name on it. Inside was a single piece of paper with words he'd spent hours perfecting. "I won't be your second choice. No explanation, no accusations, no final plea. Just a simple truth." He also left divorce papers already filed, with his lawyer's contact information. She could sign them or contest them, her choice. Either way, Michael was done fighting for someone who'd never really been his dad. At 5 p.m., Michael locked the door for the last time and dropped his key through the mail slot. Marcus was waiting in his car, ready to drive Michael to his new apartment across town, a place Sarah had never been, in a neighborhood she'd never think to look. As they pulled away, Michael glanced in the rearview mirror at the house that had been his home. By Sunday evening, Sarah would walk through that door expecting to find everything as she'd left it. Instead, she'd find silence and empty spaces and the echo of her own deception. Michael turned his eyes forward, toward whatever came next. The grief would come, he knew that. The rage and the pain and the sense of loss would catch up with him eventually. But right now, in this moment, he felt something else, relief. He was free. Sarah hummed along to the radio as she drove home Sunday evening, her body still warm from David's touch. The weekend had been perfect, no hiding, no lies. Just uninterrupted time together at the lake house he'd rented. She felt a small pang of guilt about Michael, but it was easy to push aside. He trusted her now, believed her promises. She'd managed to have everything she wanted, the security of her marriage, and the excitement of her affair. She'd spent months perfecting the balance. Michael was stable, dependable, the kind of husband who looked good on paper. But David made her feel alive in ways her marriage never had. Why should she have to choose? Other people manage these complications. She was simply smart enough to have both. As she turned onto her street, Sarah rehearsed her stories about the corporate retreat, the team-building exercises, the boring seminars, the terrible conference center food. Michael would ask polite questions, and she'd answer them, and life would continue in its comfortable patterns. She pulled into the driveway at 7:30, already composing her expression into tired but happy. The house looked normal from the outside, lights off, just as she'd left it. Michael was probably working late, as usual. Sarah grabbed her bag from the trunk and walked to the front door, fumbling for her keys. The lock turned smoothly, and she pushed the door open, calling out, "Honey, I'm home." Silence answered her, not the comfortable quiet of an empty house, but something else, something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The hallway felt different, though she couldn't immediately identify why. She dropped her bag by the door and walked further inside. Michael, still nothing. Sarah flicked on the hall light and froze. The leather armchair, Michael's grandfather's antique that usually sat by the living room window, was gone. Where the hell was the chair? Her eyes darted around the room, starting to see other absences. The bookshelf that had held Michael's collection was empty. The desk in the corner had vanished. Small spaces on the walls showed where photographs had hung. Michael. Her voice rose with panic now. She ran through the house, turning on lights, discovering more missing pieces. His clothes gone from the closet. His toiletries cleared from the bathroom. The kitchen had gaps where his coffee maker had been, where his mother's cookware had sat. It looked like they'd been robbed, but selectively, carefully. Someone had taken only Michael's things and left hers untouched. But that didn't make sense. Who would? Her phone was in her hand before she finished the thought, dialing Michael's number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Not turned off, blocked. He'd blocked her number. No, 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 Sarah whispered, her heart hammering. She tried texting. The message showed as delivered but unread. She called from the landline. The call connected, but went to voicemail after 6 rings. He was screening her calls. Panic gave way to a creeping horror as Sarah understood what she was seeing. This wasn't a robbery. This was an exit. Michael had taken his belongings and left. But when? How had he done this without her knowing? And more importantly, why? She pulled up the security camera app on her phone with shaking hands. Friday's footage loaded, and Sarah watched in disbelief as moving trucks arrived, as strangers carried furniture out of her house, as Michael supervised the systematic dismantling of their shared life. The timestamp showed 8 a.m., less than an hour after she'd left for her retreat. This was planned. Carefully, deliberately planned. But Michael had been normal all week, loving even. They had dinner together Thursday night, talked about their weekend plans. He'd kissed her goodbye Friday morning and told her to drive safely. He'd known. Somehow, impossibly, he'd known, and he'd said nothing. Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto the couch, their couch, though it felt foreign now, sitting in a half-empty room. How long had he known? What had given her away? She'd been so careful, deleting messages, taking calls in private, maintaining the perfect facade of a repentant wife. Her eyes landed on something white on the kitchen counter, an envelope with her name in Michael's handwriting. Sarah walked toward it like someone approaching a bomb, knowing it would detonate, but unable to stop herself from getting closer. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 7 words. "I won't be your second choice." That was all. No accusations, no rage, no list of her betrayals. Just a simple statement that cut deeper than any angry tirade could have. Below it were divorce papers, already filed, requiring only her signature. Sarah's phone buzzed. A notification from the real estate app she'd forgotten she'd installed when they bought the house. "Congratulations! Your property at 1847 Maple Street has entered escrow." He'd sold the house, their house. Without telling her, without asking, he'd put it on the market and found a buyer. In a daze, Sarah opened the app and saw the listing photos of their home. A price she hadn't agreed to, a closing date 30 days away. Everything was moving so fast, spinning out of her control. Sarah tried Michael's number again, blocked. She called his office. They informed her he'd taken personal leave. She tried his friend Marcus, straight to voicemail. Every avenue was closed, every connection severed. On instinct, Sarah opened her messages and scrolled to David's name. She needed comfort, reassurance, someone to tell her this wasn't happening. But as her fingers hovered over the keyboard, she realized she had nothing to say. What was David to her, really? An escape, an excitement, a fantasy that existed because her marriage had provided safety, without Michael as her foundation. David was just a man she'd betrayed her husband for, a man who'd never promised her anything, never talked about a future, never been anything more than a pleasant distraction. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to really see what she'd done. She'd had a husband who'd loved her unconditionally, who'd forgiven the unforgivable, who'd given her everything he had, including a second chance, and she'd thrown it away for late-night excitement and the ego boost of being wanted by 2 men. She'd thought she was clever, having everything, but she'd understood nothing. You can't have everything without eventually losing it all. Sarah walked through the silent house, seeing it clearly now, not as a home, but as a crime scene. The scene of a murder she'd committed slowly, one lie at a time, until she'd killed the trust and love that had once filled these rooms. The empty spaces where Michael's belongings had been were like chalk outlines, marking what was gone and would never return. She tried calling him again, blocked. She sent an email. "Please, Michael, let me explain." No response. Another email. "I'm sorry. Please come home." Nothing. Text messages poured from her phone, desperate and increasingly frantic. "I made a mistake. I'll change. Please give me another chance." But Michael had already given her that chance. She'd used it to sharpen the knife before plunging it into his back a second time. As night fell and the house grew dark around her, Sarah sat alone in the half-empty living room and understood what she'd truly lost. Not just a husband, but the person she'd been when he'd loved her, someone worthy of that love. Before she'd decided she deserved more than one person's devotion. Somewhere in the city, Michael was beginning a new life, free from her lies and manipulations. He wasn't thinking about her right now, wasn't wondering if she'd found his note, wasn't waiting for her calls. He'd simply moved on, excising her from his life with surgical precision. Sarah had thought she was the one in control, juggling 2 men, managing her double life with skill. But in the end, Michael had been the one with power, the power to simply walk away, to refuse to play the game, to choose his own dignity over her drama. The house settled around her with creaks and sighs, and Sarah realized she was crying. Not for Michael, exactly, but for herself, for the life she'd had and thrown away, for the woman she'd been before she'd decided fidelity was optional, for all the futures that would now never exist. In the morning, she'd have to figure out logistics, the house sale, the divorce, how to explain to friends and family why her husband had vanished overnight. She'd have to call David and probably discover he was less interested now, that the thrill of the forbidden was gone. She'd have to rebuild a life from the fragments of what she'd destroyed. But tonight, in this silent hallway with its obvious absences, Sarah finally understood the true cost of betrayal. Not the moment of discovery, not the confrontation or the tears, but this, the quiet, unremarkable way someone who loved you can simply cease to exist in your life. She'd made her choice, again and again, every time she'd deleted a message or kissed another man. Michael had simply made his the choice to no longer be her second option. The note still sat on the counter, 7 words that said everything. I won't be your second choice. Sarah folded it carefully and slipped it into her pocket, a reminder of the moment she'd finally run out of chances. Then she walked through the empty house, turning off lights one by one, until she sat alone in the darkness she'd created, listening to the sound of her own breathing in the space where love used to live.